boy on the beach. If you love long walks at the beach at night, you might want to skip this video. So this took place in the Playas of Manzanillo, which is in Mexico, aka Manzanillo Beach for my non-Spanish speakers. So this girl says that a few years back, her and her friends decided to take a vacation to the Playas of Manzanillo. When they arrived, they went to the hotel. It was so pretty, but this happened to her at nighttime. So this girl says that they were out and about all day, and around 2:30 in the morning, her and her bestie decided to take a walk on the beach. She said that they decided they wanted to see the sunrise, so they just kept walking on the edge of the beach to kill time. They walked so much that they ended up leaving a lot of hotels behind them, and they got to a point where there was only large rocks on the side. She said it was at that point where her friend stopped dead in her tracks and asked her if she sees what's in front of her. She admits that it was kind of hard to see anything because it was so dark and the only light source that they had was the moon. But when she did focus, she says that she could see a little boy with his back turning towards them. She could see the boy moving and it looked like he was playing with the sand. She admits that they were a little concerned because they're like, what if this kid left his family asleep and he's over here playing with the sand? So from where they were, they started calling out to the little boy. However, he never turned around. He never looked towards them. He just kept playing with the sand. She says that after the boy never turned to look at them or never responded, she admits that for some reason she started to feel really scared and her friends started to feel the same way. So when the kid never responded, they both looked at each other. They were kind of scared, and in that split second of them looking at each other and then turning back to look to see where the little boy was, he was standing right in front of them. They were both terrified because that little boy standing right in front of them was missing his eyes. Then they noticed how a strange liquid started coming out of his mouth. She also noticed that his clothes was all ripped up, and the thing that got to them was that the little boy smiled at them and he had no teeth in his mouth. She says that she stayed in shock, but she could feel her friend trying to pull her from her arm to get away from there. She doesn't know how, but she was able to turn around and they both started running away from that little boy. After a while of them running, she said that they both decided to stop and look back just to make sure that little boy was not running after them. The little boy was not running after them, but they could still see him in that same spot where they had left him behind. After a few seconds, the little boy turned around and started walking into the beach. She said that they could still see him walking into the water until they lost vision of him in between waves. They never saw him again, but they were still terrified because they were still at the beach, and for all they knew, he can come back out. She said her body had the craziest reaction because she couldn't stop shaking and her best friend couldn't stop crying. She admits that she's never gonna forget what she saw that day at the beach. She says the thing that keeps her up at night is thinking what happened to that little boy, or if that was even a little boy. After this, she started looking at the history of that beach, and there was a lot of things that people have claimed to see there as well. There was also other situations where people almost drowned, but they claimed that they felt like they were being pulled by someone under the water. I have the biggest fear of the sea, and just this.
So I want to tell you a spooky story. Now, I wouldn't consider it a ghost story, but it is a bit chilling. So anyways, our story takes us back to the early 2000s, late 1990s. There's a woman who goes on a daily walk. Now, on her daily walk, she goes through a park, and adjacent to the park is a cemetery. Now, the cemetery has a small church inside of it, and as she's walking by, she feels this compulsion to walk through the cemetery. Now, she said she's never done this before, but on this particular day, she just felt the need to go to the cemetery. So as she's walking, she's just kind of meandering. But as she continues through the cemetery and gets closer to the church, she sees that there's a coffin inside. Now, she decides that she wants to be a little bit curious, even though she knows she shouldn't be, and something tells her to go into the church. Now, as she walks into the church, she was looking around and there's absolutely nobody in there. Now, she thinks it odd and she goes up to the deceased who has his coffin out. Now, I won't say there's nobody in there. There is the funeral runner. He's in there and maybe one or two members of his staff. But she goes in, she peeks around, and there's literally no one else there. Now, the casket looked pretty expensive, and the guy, as she could tell, had on a pretty nice suit, so she assumed he was kind of wealthy. But it did strike her as odd that nobody was in there aside from her and the people who worked at the funeral home. So she sits down, and I guess the pastor comes in, and he starts to officiate the funeral. And as he's talking and giving the eulogy, she's still kind of unsettled by the fact that there's literally no one there. But anyways, the funeral ends, and as she's walking out, a member of the funeral staff or from the funeral home is like, hey, why don't you go over there and sign the guest book? So the woman is like, no, because I don't want anybody who is a member of his family to think that I just intruded on this poor man's funeral. And the guy from the funeral home is like, please go ahead and just sign the book. At least somebody came here to see him off. So the woman, thinking it a bit odd, was like, all right, fine, whatever. So she signs her signature in the book. And then the guy from the funeral home is like, well, do you have a phone number or anything? And the woman is a little off put at this point because she's like, I don't want to give these people my information. But the guy at the funeral parlor is a bit more persuasive, and he convinces her to write down her phone number. So she writes it down, she leaves the funeral, and she walks through the cemetery back towards her normal walking trail. So she heads home, and she basically all but forgets about the funeral that she attended. So a few weeks pass, she's packing up some boxes because she's about to move, when all of a sudden she gets a phone call. So she goes and picks up the phone, and she answers, hello, this is so-and-so. And on the opposite line, there's a man on the phone, and he goes, hello, my name is, we'll say, Bob Jr. And she goes, hello, Bob Jr., right? She's kind of a little off put. And he was like, you might not remember me, but I was at the funeral that you went to in the cemetery a couple of weeks ago. And she was like, oh, yeah, sorry, hey, how are you? He goes, thanks for asking, I'm doing fine. But he was like, I really wanted to call you because I wanted to see if you'd be willing to come down to our office. And she was like, why? Did I do something wrong? She's starting to panic because all she did was just go to a funeral. Nobody was there. Again, I should reiterate. So the guy at the funeral home was like, no, we just want you to come by. You were the only one who attended. So we just wanted to see if you would come by just to tell us about your experience. Now, the lady is a little unsettled, but she decides to go over there. And when she goes over there, she's greeted by the funeral staff and she's led into an office. So she's sitting there, and the guy from the funeral parlor is just kind of talking to her, asking her about her day, what she's got going on in her life. And she was like telling him, I'm about to move, etc. So as they're sitting there, somebody walks in the door. It's a man in a very well-tailored suit, looks expensive, got a full thick head of hair and a set of spectacles and a stack of papers. This person comes in, he sits in front of the woman and lays the stack of papers down on the table. And he said, do you know who I am? The woman was like, no, I'm so sorry. She was like, I did not mean to intrude on the funeral. And the man said, well, my name is, we'll say, Miles J. Miles or something, and I'm the attorney for the man that passed away. And so now she's looking really wide-eyed, and she's just nervous at this point. He said, I noticed that when I came to collect the visitor book, there was only one name that was in there. And the woman was like, yeah, I just came in to pay my respects. So the attorney, seeing her emotional state, was like, ma'am, please calm down. He was like, I just wanted to confirm that you were in fact the person who signed the book. And so the woman was like, yes, just kind of resigned to whatever fate she was about to suffer next. And so the attorney then leads with another question. He said, did you know the deceased at all? And she was like, no. And then the attorney asked a second question, and he goes, why did you come to this funeral? And this is when the woman said, again, I'm just trying to pay my respects. I didn't want anybody to have to go alone. She said, I thought somebody should be there to see him off. I would want that for myself. And so the attorney responds back to the woman and says, well, I have some news for you. In the last will and testament of the guy who passed away, it's said to divide his assets amongst everyone who attended his funeral. So the woman was looking around like, okay, so she was like, I'm not family or anything. And he goes, yes. And he thought his family would show up for him. He had a massive family. We'll say like 4 kids, ton of grandkids. He always did for them, always gave the money, made sure that they lived a secure and a life that was well taken care of, but none of them showed up. And so he was like, because you were the only person who signed this guest book, the only person we had evidence showing up to this funeral, as per the last will and testament, you are going to be the recipient of this man's entire estate. Now, this man's estate was worth millions. We'll say like $15 to $20 million. Now, the woman's breaking down at this point because the reason she was packing the boxes to move was because she had been recently laid off. And she was bawling in the office. At first she felt guilty because none of his kids would get it. A lawyer reassured her that you fairly received this money. So she's bawling there, and she just feels like this was a miracle come true. Now, again, I don't know what to think about this story. I do think it's a bit eerie, but I also think it has some lessons in there. Right? To make it even weirder, weeks later, the woman's reading the newspaper and she sees the man whose funeral she attended. This man was allegedly the last son of like some dynasty. Anyways, let me know your thoughts on this story.
A guy named Lou DMs me, right? And he says, I dated this woman who I don't think was entirely human. I think she was a succubus. Whether she was a succubus or this woman was just a little freaky, I will let you decide. But if you're new here, this is Spooky Serious Storytime, the series where we share listeners' allegedly true stories about the creepiest or most unbelievable things that they've never told anyone before. And I figure with Valentine's Day coming up, let's do some dating stories. So Lou says that this took place about 15 years ago. He was in his mid-20s. Lou starts hanging out with this new group of friends, and they're all guys. They're all really cool. They all get along really well with Lou, but also in this friend group is this one woman that he calls Sally for this story. And Sally is stunning. She's beautiful, but Lou also knows that she's dated every single guy in this friend group. Some of the relationships were serious, others were not, but Lou knew that at least one of the men had been engaged to Sally at one point. It had ended on mutual terms and they got along. So Lou was like, I don't really care. They were really cool people. I liked hanging out with them and there didn't seem to be any drama. But Lou was dating this woman we'll call Maggie, and Maggie hated Sally, but Lou always thought that it was just because she was a little bit jealous of Sally because Sally was so gorgeous. He said he had been with Maggie for a long time and she really didn't have anything to worry about. So he always did his best to reassure her. He's like, look, there's no feelings here. She's dated like everybody else and she's just kind of one of the guys. Maggie was not having it and she did not want Lou around Sally at all. She's like, she just gives me bad vibes. I don't care if you don't have feelings for her. I would prefer if you didn't go out with them when she's there. And Lou's like, look, it's fine. And this actually became a point of tension between Lou and Maggie for a lot of it. And they ended up breaking up. It wasn't because of Sally or anything like that. I guess there were some other problems in the relationship anyway. Regardless, Maggie continues warning him not to hang out with Sally. She's like, she still gives me bad vibes. I just don't think you should date her. But fast forward a little bit, Lou is hanging out with this friend group like every single day for a period of 18 months, and Sally is almost always there. For a lot of this period, Sally was actually in a relationship with a different man, but they ended up breaking up sometime in this period. And one weekend, the big friend group decides that they're all going to go on a weekend trip because everybody is pretty much single, and they end up getting a few hotel rooms and sharing some beds. And Lou said he had no ulterior motives. He had no plans to share a bed with Sally, but that's just kind of the way that the cards landed. And he had always thought of her as a friend up to this point, even though he thought she was pretty, but that was pretty much the extent of it. But they end up going to sleep after everybody hangs out. There's like no hanky-panky, nothing going on, but he's awoken from this dream and it's kind of a steamy dream, if you know what I mean. And he looks over and he's shocked because Sally's in the bed next to him, engaged with herself, I guess is how I should put it. He rolls over, pretends he's just asleep and he didn't see anything. But this night was the start of what became like a pattern of seduction on Sally's part. He said she would often invite him over, in which he would answer the door with no clothes on, or she would invite him into the bathroom while she was changing, things of that nature. He said he was doing his best to act normal, but she was constantly like, you should come over before we go meet up with the rest of the guys. And then she would change in front of him, and he never acted on it and she never acted on it. But over the course of the next few weeks, he began to be more and more attracted to her. One of the things that he found most appealing about her was her scent. He said it was just intoxicating. And he said, I've noticed the way that people smell before, but this was like something else entirely. And I would think of that smell long after I had left, or I would catch a whiff of it and it would just make me kind of desire her. But he still doesn't act. He actually starts dating another woman, which doesn't really go anywhere. And Sally continued flirting with him even after he told her that he was seeing another woman. I guess one day Sally calls him up. She's like, how's it going with this new woman? And he tells her, oh, it didn't really work out. And she goes, well, why don't we go on a friend date? Let's get some dinner, like without all the other guys. And he's like, you know what? I got nothing else to do. So he ends up meeting up with her. Going into it, he felt a little bit awkward. So he decided he was actually going to invite the rest of the guys, but they were all busy or unavailable that evening. And so it ends up just being him and Sally. And that date ended up in Sally's bed. Lou says that that was a huge mistake because this began a period of 8 months in which he basically completely lost himself. He ended up dropping out of his degree program. He went into a deep depression, and it caused this huge rift between one of his close friends and him. And that was one of Sally's exes, naturally. He said in this period, Sally pretty much just drained him entirely, mentally, physically, and she seemed to really enjoy the turmoil that she caused between him and the rest of the friend group. He said even though he knew that this relationship was toxic, was bad for him during this period, he could not leave her. But after 8 months, he finally had the courage. He was like, you know what, it's done. And he left Sally and actually began dating another woman. But the second that Sally said that she wanted him back, he left this new other woman, a decision that he said he still feels bad about because it left the other woman very hurt. Going back to Sally was a huge mistake too. And that's when things got really, really weird. And when he started thinking that she might be doing something else that was not just simple seduction. Night, shortly after they had reconciled, he was over at her house and things were getting a little steamy, and she indicated to him that, let me think of how to put this. I'm going to heavily censor this, but use context clues, okay? She indicated to him that she wanted to make an incision in his skin with a sharp object and drink the liquid that courses through all of our veins. He said when she said this, he thought she was joking, but then she pulls out a kit that indicates that she has done this before and that she intends to do it to him. And he said he wanted to please her, so he said, okay, what could it hurt? So he lets her, okay? And he said the second that she started drinking that liquid that courses through his veins, she changed completely. And it was not even somebody he recognized. He said she pulled her head back and she was already really pale, but now her skin was translucent. Her eyes had turned completely black, like he couldn't even see her pupils. And she let out this blood-curdling scream. As she screamed, this liquid drips out of the side of her mouth, and that scared him. And he said, all of a sudden, I felt very dizzy. I didn't feel well. And she indicated that she wanted to make the incision wider and continue, but he told her that he wasn't feeling well. And this sent Sally into a complete rage where she flipped out. She started screaming at him and destroying things all over the apartment. They ended up getting over that fight. They continue seeing each other, but he said he never was able to shake that image of her face changing in front of him when she did that from his mind. And so he started trying to spend more time away from her. And he said every time he was around her, it felt like he was in this like haze, like she just had all of his energy. He couldn't focus on anything else. But as he spent more time away from her, the haze would last for like a day, and then he would start to be clear-headed again. Said with each day apart, he would start to get more energy back and feel more like himself. But when he started really feeling like himself and kind of forgetting her, all of a sudden he would catch a whiff of her and she wouldn't even be anywhere around him. But it was like her scent, that one that intoxicated him, would fill the car or whatever room he was sitting in. And all of a sudden it was like he was being sucked back to her. They did end up breaking up finally when he found out that she had been seeing another guy in the friend group, one of her exes, behind his back. And as a result, he dove into his career. He cut contact with pretty much all of those guys. Not before asking them if they were also intoxicated by her scent, but none of them knew what he was talking about. He was like, maybe it was just her pheromones and the way that they interacted with me, but like that scent followed me for years. And I ultimately ended up following my career and leaving the country for a little while, which ultimately severed ties completely. He said for a long time he would still smell her, but it's not like the way that you remember your grandmother's chicken parmesan and the way that it smelled. This was something else entirely. That when I would smell it, or when I would remember smelling it, that memory would overwhelm all of my senses, like somehow I was supercharged and I felt like I had to get back to her. Never saw Sally again. And what I think is interesting about this, though, and what he said prompted him to send this story, is about 2 weeks ago, after not thinking of Sally in years, all of a sudden he was overwhelmed with her scent again. And he was like, wow, that's weird. And all of these memories came flooding back. And that's when later that day he logs on to social media. He didn't go looking for her, but sitting at the top of his social media feed is a suggested friend, which is Sally. And he said he briefly glanced at the photo, and even though it's been 15 years and she's in her like early 40s now, she looked the exact same as she did when she was in her mid 20s. He said, I'm not even gonna lie, I did feel a tug to investigate further, but I ultimately decided against it, and I hope that's the last that I ever see her or hear from her again. So what do you think? Was Sally human? How did she overwhelm him with her scent? If you have a spooky, scary story that you think nobody believed, especially if it's a dating one this week with Valentine's coming up, send it in. We would love to hear it.
This is 100% true story that happened to a woman in Madison, Wisconsin. Now, there was this woman named Sherry who moved into this house with her 2 children in Madison, Wisconsin. Now, she said, at the time she didn't believe in anything supernatural. She really thought that was a bunch of nonsense. But she said, right away when they moved in, she would notice, out of the corner of her eye sometimes, shadows moving across the walls. She would hear strange noises that she couldn't explain. But she said for the most part, it was just a normal house. One night, she's upstairs in her bedroom and she's folding laundry. She hears talking coming from her son's room. So she makes her way over to his room. The door's closed and she hears her son having a full-on conversation with someone. And she's like, who is he talking to, at 12:30 at night? So she opens the door, and when she looks in his room, he is not in his bed. So she starts yelling for him. She looks down and sees him next to the side of his bed, on his knees, crouched down, with his head under the bed, talking to someone. And she's like, hey, who are you talking to? Like, who's under there? And her son's like, I can't tell you. And she said, what do you mean you can't tell me? Like, who's under the bed? And he's like, I can't say. He'll get mad. And she's like, what? Who's under there? So she runs over to the bed and she looks underneath there. It's empty. There's nothing under there. So she's like, you know what? Just get back in bed. Like, just stop, doing whatever you're doing. Several weeks pass, and like on a regular basis, she keeps finding her son talking to someone under the bed, except there's no one there. So after a few weeks of this happening, she thinks maybe something is wrong with her son. So she takes him to this child therapist. The therapist assesses him and says, he seems completely fine. It's probably just his imagination. So several months pass and he keeps on doing this. Well, one day she's sitting down in the living room with him and they're talking when she notices he has some scratches and bruises all over his body. And she's like, where did you get those scratches and bruises from? Like, what's going on? And he's like, I can't tell you. And she's like, yes, you have to tell me, like, what is going on with you? And finally he breaks down and he starts crying and stuff. And he just starts freaking out. And then he runs up to his room. So the mom, you know, at this time is like, I don't know what to do. Like, what is going on with my son? Like, she's just panicking. Later that night, she's awoken to her son screaming in his bedroom. She runs as fast as she can. She goes in his room. She finds him halfway underneath the bed. He's grabbing onto the bed frame, and it looks like something is pulling him under the bed. So she immediately grabs him, pulls him out from under the bed. She looks under there. There's no one there. So she's like, you know what? This is weird. Like, you're sleeping with me tonight. You're going to be in bed with me tonight. So they go back to her bedroom. He lays down. He falls asleep. She's sitting in bed. She can't sleep. She's like freaked out about this whole situation. When all of a sudden she hears, shh, hey, come under the bed. And she's like, what? She looks over. Her son is sleeping. But then once again, she hears, hey, come here under the bed. I need to talk to you. And it's like a man's voice. And she's like, no, who are you? Like, go away. And the man's like, come on, get under the bed. I need to tell you something. And like, she's like, no, I'm not going under the bed. And she said this man, whoever he was, just started yelling obscenities and getting really angry. So she grabs her son. They get out of the house. And she said she left that night and never went back. And still to this day, that house sits there. And she said she's talked to the neighbors. And they said since she's moved, like several families have lived there and they move out immediately.
He was the first Peter Pan, except he didn't get the fairy tale ending, the dark side of Disney, story time. So we all know that the Disney machine has chewed up and spit out a lot of child stars, but one of its first victims was a little boy named Bobby Driscoll. Robert Cletus Driscoll was born March 3rd, 1937 to his parents Cletus and Isabella Driscoll in Cedar Rapids, Iowa. His daddy was an insulation salesman and his mother was a teacher. They were a seemingly normal family, but not long after Bobby was born, his family began to notice that he was getting a lot of attention. While all babies get attention for being cute, Bobby was getting extra attention, like people just had to stop and gush over him. Even as an infant, Bobby possessed a terrifying type of charisma that just mesmerized people. He would go on and on about his thick hair, his bright eyes, and his little button nose that naturally pointed upwards. They would pinch and pull at his chubby round cheeks, saying, what a beautiful baby. His appearance wasn't the only thing that people noticed about him. They could also see how creative, intelligent, and outgoing he was for his very young age. From the time he could talk, Bobby would sing, dance, do impressions. He had a great memory, and he was good at mimicking other people. The way they walked and talked, their facial expressions, their mannerisms, he could imitate them perfectly. He memorized songs, dances, and movies, and even make his own little skits. Around 1943, a doctor tells Bobby's father, Cletus, that after working with all the installation, he now has serious respiratory issues, and he needs to move somewhere with warmer climate, like California. Cletus took his doctor's advice. They sold off their stuff, packed the car, and they moved to California. One day, while getting a haircut, Bobby's singing, dancing, and cutting jokes when the barber tells his mom, you need to get him in the movies, he's good. It's the cliche start of 1,000 tragedies. We hear it in every case. You should get that kid in the movies. They should be acting. It just so happened the barber's son was also acting, so they were able to help Bobby's mother get an audition at MGM for a small role, and they loved him. At 5 years old with no training, Bobby didn't just memorize his lines or know the marks. He got into the role. He became the character. He was great. They said Bobby had something as a child that most adult actors with training never have. When Bobby was told to cry, he instantly cried tears on cue, and it made you feel bad for him. And when he smiled, you felt happy for him. He made you feel like this was real. For a couple of years, Bobby plays a few little background roles, but nothing groundbreaking. Until 1946, when Walt Disney had taken over the cartoon world and was now looking for something new. He wanted a fresh face. Someone with a lovable, innocent face that would bring in a whole new generation of viewers. Walt had a knack for picking child stars, and when he first saw Bobby, he saw Disney's future. He knew Bobby was going to blow the brand up. He's not just going to work for us, he's going to bring these characters to life. Walt was in the process of creating Song of the South, which was animation live mix, and Walt wanted a kid who could carry the emotional weight of this movie and would work really hard, so he gave Bobby a screen test, and Bobby nailed it. So at 9 years old, Bobby starts working with Disney, but did not sign a contract because Disney Studios did not have contracts yet. So when Bobby came into the picture, Walt took Bobby under his wing and treated Bobby like his own child. This wasn't just a work-type relationship. They were now a family on and off the set. Bobby hung out with Walt's children. Walt would tell people, Bobby is a son I never had. He would buy Bobby these extravagant gifts, and he would give him life advice, and Bobby looked up to Walt. He even called him Uncle Walt. When Bobby was 11, Disney approached him and his parents with the contract. They signed, and Bobby became the first actor to sign with Disney. Some of his co-stars began to notice that Walt was giving him a lot of attention, and he was starting to steal the show. There was some animosity on set. And Walt was known for love bombing and playing favorites. He treated these kids differently. And he got more roles, which wasn't his fault. Bobby was just doing what he was contracted to do. Smile, look happy, work hard, and don't complain. And that he did. At that point, Bobby basically belonged to the studio. His hair, his clothes, the way he acted, where he went, what he said, where he worked, they controlled it all. So Bobby was earning over $800 a week, sometimes more, which was a lot of damn money at that time. It was more than his daddy made in a year. But before long, the pressure did begin to mount on Bobby. He couldn't have bad days. He couldn't throw tantrums. He wasn't allowed to feel bad. Bobby was told more than once, if you get sick, production stops. If you don't feel good, production stops. Disney loses money. Your family loses money. What you do affects production. You have to work. And these kids were controlled by everyone around them. The directors, the executives, the creators, their parents. Everyone wanted them to smile and be happy and do their job so everyone else could get paid. As Bobby worked, his parents controlled his finances. He was a sole provider. He paid the bills. Now it's a routine of, if Bobby doesn't work, we don't eat. We have to depend on Bobby to live, and that was hard for him as a kid. Like most child stars, he's being overworked, living on set, not getting to be a kid while his family's living a life of luxury. And because he's worked so much, he has no friends, no relationships. He's socially awkward. He don't know how to talk to people. It was a well-oiled machine that was constantly being greased up with the blood of child stars. Bobby got so famous so fast that by 1948, he was the most sought-out child actor in the world. At one point, Disney let Bobby do a movie with RKO called The Window about a little boy that witnesses a murder but has been crying wolf and no one believes him. And that role was so dark and dramatic. And just like with Disney, Bobby was a professional on set. He didn't whine or complain, he worked. The movie was a hit and it earned Bobby a Juvenile Academy Award. So after The Window success, Disney did their first live-action film ever, Treasure Island, so they hired Bobby. This was a mass production, it was huge, and Bobby poured everything into his role. He was great. But it was the first time that Bobby got to see the dark side of the business and the media. They were filming in the UK, which had very strict child labor laws at that time because kids were being so overworked and parents were squandering their fortunes. These laws were created to protect children like Bobby, but the studios didn't like that because they wanted to work them for hours on end and they couldn't without getting in trouble. So sometime after filming started, the British courts decided that Bobby was illegally working and they wanted him out of the country. When it was all said and done, Bobby got a fine and was deported. And of course the tabloids went crazy. They wrote, Disney Golden Boy kicked out of country, working illegally, child star booted out of country, and it was so embarrassing for Bobby and Disney. And that put a big strain on Bobby and Disney's relationship, even though it wasn't his fault. But despite all the drama that went down in the UK, Treasure Island was a hit. So they come back from the UK and Disney is still telling Bobby, you're going to have future work. Everything's fine. I've got another movie for you. So Bobby, who still loves Uncle Walt, thinks he's going to protect me. He's going to take care of me. And that's when they begin the works of Peter Pan. Now, a lot of people assume that Bobby was just the voice of Peter Pan, but that is not true. In the Disney process of the 1950s animation, it was built upon live action reference, which meant Bobby had to become Peter Pan in person, do all the singing and the stunts while the artist drew him doing it on paper. So Bobby spent his days in a makeshift set, jumping, running, fighting, flying, pretending like he's fighting these imaginary people. And Peter Pan's face was not made up. It's based on Bobby's image. And it's kind of creepy when you put them side by side just how identical they are. The eyes, the smile, the button nose, the hair sticking up. It's like they took Bobby and froze him in a cartoon. So when you were watching Peter Pan, you were watching the cartoon version of Bobby Driscoll. I tell you, Bobby poured everything into that role. All he had, his blood, sweat, tears, emotion, everything. Bobby worked long, excruciating hours doing the same scenes repeatedly until it was done. And I'm trying to clarify this to y'all so much because I want you to understand why what happened next hurt Bobby so much. Of course, Peter Pan was a huge success. It was all people could talk about. And just weeks after Peter Pan's release, production began treating Bobby differently, giving him the cold shoulder. And the old Disney curse was about to strike. Every child star's worst fear, hitting puberty, and it had just hit Bobby in a big way. So by the age of 15, no matter how hard he tries, puberty kicks in. His voice is cracking, he has acne, he's gotten taller, he's starting to fill out, and the cast and crew are beginning to whisper. And instead of changing the costume size or giving him a more mature role, they're telling Bobby, you're getting too tall, you're too filled out, your voice is too deep, you got acne, you're growing up, like we can't cover this up anymore, like it's his fault for aging. These were people who watched him grow up on set, people he thought were family. They were treating him like a disease. Bobby starts to feel dirty inside of his own body. He blames himself for aging. He's doing anything he can to look younger. Bobby wants to please his Uncle Walt, and he's got to support his family financially. He is the breadwinner of the home. If he doesn't work, his family doesn't eat, but he's trying not to worry too much because he knows Uncle Walt won't turn his back on him. Now that I'm older, I've proven myself, I'm successful, Uncle Walt will give me the lead role in another film as a man. He's a part of the Disney family. He's worked hard and made everyone a lot of money. They're not going to fire him over acne, right? But what happened next was so shocking, it sent Bobby into a tailspin and destroyed the rest of his life. Part 2 of the Bobby Driscoll story is coming up. Stay tuned. Truth Behind the Real Peter Pan, Part 2. Peter Pan was released in 1953 and it was a hit. This movie blew up and it made Disney a lot of money. Bobby is now 15 and he's starting to notice that the cast, directors, and producers are all whispering behind his back. Sure enough, one day, the fun, sweet Uncle Walt that used to take Bobby out for ice cream and buy toys just began to change, and Walt didn't want to spend time with Bobby anymore. The man who had once held Bobby in his arms and called him his son no longer did that. Walt stopped inviting him over to family gatherings and birthday parties, but Bobby always thought to himself, hey, if I do age, Walt's not just going to kick me out. He's going to have some kind of work for me. I mean, he's like family to me. He knew him and Walt had a special bond, a relationship. The success of Peter Pan should have made Uncle Walt very happy with me, right? Wrong. Bobby didn't understand. He was being paid to be a child, and he was no longer a child, and Walt did not need him anymore. Walt's cash cow was drying up, and Walt was about to do something so disgusting and disrespectful, it's just evil. So weeks after the release of Peter Pan, Bobby drives up to the studio thinking, well, Uncle Walt's probably got a new movie for me, some teen romance drama or comedy. He pulls up to the parking lot where the security's standing by at the gate. Bobby shows the security guard his badge, and the security guard says, you're not on the list. Bobby says, what? I've been coming here every day for years. What do you mean I'm not on the list? We know each other. I know you by name. You know me by name. He said, check the list again. I work here. And the security guard checked the list and said, no, you're not on the list. You can't go in. This same security guard had watched Bobby grow up, and he was now treating Bobby like he didn't know him. Like, nope, you're not on the list. You need to leave. Bobby said, it must be a mistake. Please call the office. So the guard calls the office, nods his head, puts the phone down and says, no, it's not a mistake. You're not allowed on the lot. The man he worshipped like a father, Walt Disney, had instructed a guard to simply block his entry. Walt Disney could not even be bothered to fire Bobby to his face. He told the guard to send him off the lot. There was no party, no handshake, no meeting with Uncle Walt, no goodbye or farewell, no thank you for making the best movies our companies had ever seen and making us the most money we'd ever made in our lifetime. Nothing. They fired Bobby Driscoll because he had pimples. Bobby had now been replaced by his own ghost, the animated version of Peter Pan. Bobby drove away from that set in a very dark place. He just couldn't understand why Uncle Walt, the family, the executives, the producers, the directors, the guard, why anyone would treat him like this, like they had practically raised him. And now his parents weren't too happy either because the life they had built off of his paychecks had drastically changed. There were no more paychecks. When I tell you the panic in this household was immediate, now it's back to mom and dad having to figure out how to be parents and how to stabilize the family financially. And you tell me what they did with all that money, because there were times they made over $800 a week. That was a lot of money back in them days. But Bobby didn't care about the money. He was more heartbroken over losing his on-set family. He had gotten accustomed to a certain routine every day for years, and then all of a sudden it's ripped away. He could have cared less about the money. And you would think because he was the Disney Golden Boy that he would have had all these opportunities lined up, but he didn't. Back then, once a child star was associated with Disney, they couldn't find work anywhere else. No one wanted to work with them. They were considered damaged goods. Like, as long as they were working for Disney, everyone wanted them. But if Disney fired them, nobody would touch them. They would say, you're too famous to play the hero. You're too famous to play the extra. You're too famous to play the sad guy. We have no role for you, Bobby. And what sucked, he was a phenomenal actor. Of course, like all other child stars, when they can't go back to Hollywood, their parents immediately shove them into public school, somewhere they've barely been. And public school to a child star is like a Shark Tank. Nobody is wanting to be their friend. Nobody thinks they're cool. The kids were relentless. They bullied him every day. Oh, what are you going to do? Cry, you little fairy? Peter Pan followed him around everywhere he went. He was called so many horrific names. They saw him as a fallen celebrity, like, you're not cool anymore. You're in public school now. Unlike nowadays, Bobby Driscoll would have been a god in high school. Like, dude, you work for Disney. You are Peter Pan. You're freaking famous. Back then, it wasn't like that. Being fired by Disney affected every part of his life, including high school. And the worst part was because he spent his childhood on set, he wasn't around other children that much, so he had no social skills. His parents did not prepare him for the real world, so he had no idea how to talk to other children or teachers. He didn't know how to get a regular job or do basic things. Bobby was extremely anxious, stressed out. He didn't know how he was going to support his family, something that he shouldn't have even had to worry about. You're being told as a minor, we're losing everything because you're not working. Well, we had everything because you were working. Like, it's a big burden on their shoulders. Bobby felt like he didn't fit in anywhere, at school, at home, with friends. He couldn't even make friends. So, like other child stars, he turned to drugs and alcohol. And I mean, from a very young age, Bobby's addiction jumped very quickly from marijuana to alcohol to heroin. Now, from 1954 to 1957, Bobby did land a few small roles, like on Dragnet and a couple other shows, but they weren't like what he had before. And they damn sure didn't pay what he had been paid before. In those roles, you can look at his his face and tell it didn't make him happy. He didn't want to be there. It was just something to make money. It didn't help in 1955 when he was arrested for marijuana. All the tabloids read, Disney child star arrested. At the age of 19, Bobby decides he's going to straighten up and get his life together. And eventually, that's where he meets a 19-year-old woman named Marilyn. They get married, and then they have 3 children. And even though he loves Marilyn and she's an amazing wife to him, Bobby just cannot let go of his addiction or his past trauma. But eventually, Bobby goes downhill again. His addiction gets the best of him, and he's out getting in trouble. In 1958, Bobby did his last film. That was Party Crashers. He tried his best, and you can tell he did, but he just wasn't in a good place to be filming. He was known on set as unreliable, a junkie, a problem, so a lot of people didn't want to work with him. Bobby starts going down a really bad path where he's now turning to crime. He's writing fraudulent checks and getting arrested. By 1960, he and Marilyn are getting divorced. The guy who was once the Disney golden child is now a thug and a criminal. He is just a full-blown addict. He's doing whatever it takes to get that fix. By the age of 24, Bobby is in prison, and he looks like he is 40 years old. The man is aging so bad. While in prison, he was forced to kick his heroin habit, and that was when he decided he was going to change his life once he got out. This was the first time since he was 16 that he had actually been clean and sober. In 1962, he was released from prison. He reached out to his friends in Hollywood, but nobody would work with him. They all seen him as a problem.
Part 3 coming up. Stay tuned.
Wait till you hear this one. It is so weird. I've actually seen videos of things just like this on the internet, so I want to know what you guys think. Okay, so one of my followers sent this story in. She'd like to remain anonymous, but she tells the story that took place in late summer of 1999. Her husband gets home from a long day's work, and then they both decide that they want to go fishing. So they headed over to the new riverside of the Claytor Lake Dam in Radford, Virginia. She said it was about 6 o'clock when they got there, and they parked in this very large and wide gravel parking lot. So her husband was getting his fishing gear together, and he was talking to her about maybe going down to the local store to grab some night crawlers. So it was about right then when a man, kind of out of nowhere, came running right by them, and it was in such a close proximity that it actually startled them and made them stop speaking to each other as they watched him go by. So she says that there was a car parked not very far from where they were, and it was kind of parked diagonally, and this guy ran past them and behind that parked car. And listen to this, as he seamlessly passed behind the car, a dog emerged from the other side and ran across the street and disappeared into the woods. So they're standing there very confused at first, and they're looking over at this car, like expecting this guy to come popping up or something. And after he didn't, her husband goes over and looks back behind the car, and there is no man in sight. Like, he was just gone. Kind of like he turned into a dog and continued on his merry way. So they kind of decided, you know what? Today's not the best day to go fishing. And they packed their stuff back up and they got the heck out of there. How freaking weird is that? Let me know what you guys think in the comments. I'm sure she'll be checking them out. And if you're new here, don't forget to follow for more creepy story time.
On the night of June 1st, 2018, 68-year-old Nancy Crampton Brophy sat in bed with her computer on her lap in the home she shared with her husband in the suburb of Beaverton, Oregon. Nancy was trying to work on her newest book, but for some reason she just couldn't focus on the chapter she was writing. So Nancy was a romance writer who had actually finished 11 novels, and she also ran a blog with some other romance writers who lived in the area. Now, writing really was Nancy's passion, and she'd been doing it her whole life. But despite that, she really had not made any real money from writing. She'd never gotten a legitimate publisher to buy one of her books, so those 11 novels she did, well, they had to be self-published, and basically had to be free online for anybody to read them. And so, in order to keep on writing, she had to have a day job to pay the bills. In the past, she'd run a catering company, but now she worked for Medicare. However, despite not having made it big, at least not financially as a writer yet, it didn't deter Nancy. I mean, she was totally motivated to keep on writing because she believed that, the next thing she wrote was going to be the thing that finally made her a bestseller and made her famous and financially stable on her writing. However, tonight, Nancy just felt completely stuck. She could not think of what to write next. So she leaned back into her pillow and just thought about what her character was going through and tried to think if she'd ever gone through anything similar that might inspire, what would need to happen next in the story. So these romance epics that Nancy wrote were very over the top, but she did draw a lot of inspiration from her actual personal life. Most of her work featured very powerful women and had similar themes like freedom and strength and love because Nancy really valued all those things in her own life. The other things all her books had in common was they always had happy endings. And Nancy knew all about happy endings because in some ways, she was living one. Nancy and her husband, Dan Brophy, had been married for almost 25 years. They had both been married before, and Dan actually had a son and granddaughter from his first marriage. And so the fact that Nancy and Dan had found each other after essentially both of them had been living what, felt like very complete lives to that point, felt like another theme that she wrote about all the time, which was this idea of fate, as if fate is the thing that brought Nancy and Dan together. Dan and Nancy even called themselves soulmates, sort of playing on this idea that really fate had led them together. They had fights and disagreements like any other couple, but they also knew each other so well that sometimes Nancy felt like they could almost read each other's minds, and that sort of got them through any rough patches. And also, another part of the reason that they seemed to work so well together as a couple was because they gave each other plenty of space to pursue their own interests. They were, given freedom, something again that Nancy really valued. And so for Nancy, her sense of freedom, her sense of, being able to pursue what she wanted to, meant shutting herself away every evening in their little attic bedroom for hours and hours to write. And for Dan, his sense of freedom and his ability to pursue his own interests meant working long hours at a career he loved as a chef and a teacher at the Oregon Culinary Institute. Just like Nancy was sort of obsessed with writing, Dan was obsessed with food and cooking. And when he was not in a kitchen, he was often out in the backyard of his and Nancy's house, raising chickens and working in his garden, or maybe on a trip into the Oregon woods to forage for mushrooms. But tonight, despite how happy Nancy's life was and how secure she felt in her own relationship, none of that really mattered relative to what she was trying to do, which was write this book. She just was not able to do it. And as she continued to struggle with writer's block, her mind kind of spiraled off into more sort of pessimistic thinking, and she began thinking about, the money problems that recently had begun to take a toll on both her and Dan. Neither Nancy nor Dan had ever made particularly high salaries, and their finances had always been pretty tight, so that was kind of normal for their relationship. But about 2 years ago, they'd gotten really behind on credit card debt, and that extra debt threw everything else out of whack, and at one point they actually had not even been able to afford their mortgage. Now, realistically, things were actually more under control now. Nancy and Dan had taken a chunk of money from Dan's retirement account to pay off some of this debt, and they'd also made the decision to sell the house they were in now, and downsize, which Nancy actually was kind of excited about. With these lower overhead costs, it would likely mean that she would get to quit her day job and just pursue her passion, writing, and also pursue being the best grandmother she possibly could be. So in a way, things were starting to look up, at least in terms of, their financial situation. But Nancy knew, especially tonight, that she couldn't just forget about the fact that they had these problems. She couldn't just pretend they weren't there. In fact, tonight, the reason Dan was not home when normally he would be is because recently Dan had picked up a second job cooking for an assisted living facility, and he had picked it up to help pay off this debt. So it really was sort of beginning to infect their whole lives, this debt. He was working for a friend of theirs. It was a woman whose name was Tanya Medlin. And the job wasn't bad exactly, but it definitely was not Dan's dream job either. But just then, as Nancy's having all these kind of conflicting and sort of bad thoughts, she heard the front door open and realized that Dan must be home. So she slammed her laptop shut, figured she would attack this later, and she went downstairs to meet him. Nancy got to the front door just as Dan was taking off his boots and coming into the house. And she quickly gave him a kiss and asked how his shift went. But Dan just kind of grunted and said, fine. And then he disappeared into the kitchen to make some food. Dan had always been a pretty gruff person, but to Nancy it was sort of part of his charm. He was blunt and a little socially awkward, but his love language was food. And so he made her elaborate meals to show her that he cared about her, and she knew that. Nancy did know that other people didn't really understand Dan and often took his mannerisms and gruffness the wrong way. In fact, at the last school where he taught, he'd gotten fired because of his bad attitude. And at the Culinary Institute where he was currently teaching, a group of students had complained that he was way too tough and had impossible standards. Now, Nancy did worry about this. She understood Dan, she knew what he was like. But, the reality here is that if he loses his job or multiple jobs here, they're going to be in a bad spot financially. And again, they have these financial problems that they're working through, but that would be really bad. And then also on top of that, this was sort of buried in the back of Nancy's mind, is she had this fear that, Dan was going to upset the wrong person. It just seemed like he kind of made people mad everywhere he went, and who knows? I mean, a student could snap and try to hurt him, and so maybe it was just the stress kind of coming through as she can't write and they have money problems, but on this night she just had this feeling of like, I hope he's going to be okay here. I hope he isn't going to make more people mad and jeopardize his own safety. And so Nancy goes to Dan in the kitchen and she kind of tries to lighten the mood and just like ask him how the day went, nothing too crazy. But she noticed that Dan's attitude was really bad. Like even by his standards, he was really being quite rude. And Nancy knew that very likely the reason for this is because he had to work the second job because they were in debt. And so Nancy tried to be understanding, but as Dan got grouchier and grouchier over the course of the next few minutes, Nancy just started to feel like he was being rude to her and it was totally unnecessary. And it's like, she's in this with him. Why are you treating me so badly? Eventually, Dan finished making his snack, and it was big enough that he put some on a plate for Nancy as well, and he handed it to her. And this made Nancy smile, even though she was kind of annoyed with Dan, because it felt like, oh, the old Dan's back. Giving me food is his way of showing me he loves me. And so they ultimately sat down together, and they ate, and they chatted a little bit before Dan said, I'm tired, I'm going to bed. Just before 5 a.m. the next day, so June 2nd, Nancy woke up to the sound of Dan banging around in their bathroom. Nancy liked to sleep in when she could, and today she could. But Dan, he couldn't, because he had a lot to do that morning, so he was up. That day, he had to go to his school, the Oregon Culinary Institute, to set up the classroom before his students got there, and then also teach that day. And then before that, he also had a list of chores that he did around the house before work, like feeding his chickens. Nancy tried to fall back asleep, but Dan, frankly, was too loud. And at this point, she was kind of back in some negative thought loops and she couldn't sleep. And so she laid there and she began thinking in particular of all the negative thoughts about the book, that she just couldn't continue to write this book. It was like she really had writer's block. And she had not really experienced that in previous novels. This one was just really, really challenging. And so after tossing and turning for a few more minutes, feeling really frustrated, she decided she would just get up and go take a drive and just clear her mind. This was Nancy's go-to. Whenever she needed to work out a storyline or plot hole, she would just hop in her car and drive around and just kind of let her thoughts wander. And this morning, she knew exactly where she wanted to go. She wanted to go to this very beautiful neighborhood with streetcar tracks and tree-lined roads in the nearby city of Portland. So up and out of bed she got. She found Dan in the bathroom and said bye to him, and then she went outside, got in her car, and she was off. Less than 20 minutes later, and Nancy was in Portland. In particular, she was in the neighborhood that she thought was beautiful, and it was this area near a place called Washington Park. And so it's got beautiful foliage, and there's all these beautiful homes, and it's just this wonderful area. And she's driving around, just kind of looking out the window, enjoying herself. And then she had this sort of pang of jealousy, because Dan's school, where he worked, was roughly in this area. And so he got to go through here every morning, and she suddenly felt like, man, I wish I could do that. However, as she continued to drive around Portland, she began to see other sides of the city that she herself did not necessarily think were so great. In particular, she drove through an area where there were all these tents on the streets, where people who were displaced or potentially homeless, that's where they were living. And, they were making the best of it, but from her perspective, this represented danger. And in fact, there'd been a whole lot more drug and criminal activity in this area lately that sort of coincided with more and more of these tents popping up around town. And this had actually really bothered Dan. He was worried about this. However, the way Dan had responded ultimately, beyond just telling Nancy about his concerns, is he had recently started this outreach program where he took extra food from his school and he gave it to a local church to help feed the homeless. Now, Nancy and Dan both thought this was a great idea, and it seemed like, giving back in that way was exactly the right way to respond to what really amounted to a homelessness crisis in the city. But for Nancy, who worried about Dan, she couldn't help but feel like, I kind of wish he wasn't really getting involved. Like, I don't really want him in this part of town. I want him home and safe, or just at his school and safe there. And she just had this growing sense of dread that something was going to happen to Dan. But as Nancy is having seemingly like 10 thoughts all at once in all different directions, she suddenly has an epiphany. She has this moment of absolute clarity about how to write her book. It was like all these elements came together and were showing her the way. And so in an instant, she turned back around and she drove back home to get to work. When Nancy got back to her house, she saw that Dan was already gone, which meant he was off to work at the Culinary Institute, which meant Dan was sort of, back into the dangerous part of town, potentially, surrounded by these homeless people that could potentially harm him. At least that's where her head was going. But she told herself she needed to focus. She needed to just do the writing while she had this moment of clarity. And so she rushes up to her bedroom and she spends the next 2+ hours just writing nonstop. But then at around 10 a.m. that morning, her concentration was broken when her cell phone rang. And when she answered it, she was very surprised to hear one of Dan's colleagues from the Institute on the other line. And the colleague sounded totally frantic, and she told Nancy that Dan was not at the school, and she had heard there was a shooting at the school this morning. And so she was just worried about Dan. She had to make sure he was okay. She said she had tried to call Dan to see what was going on, but he hadn't answered, and so she was hoping that Nancy would know where he was. When Nancy heard this, it was like immediately her mind exploded with all the worst possible case scenarios that could be playing out here. But, she took a deep breath and tried to stay calm, and she told this colleague, although she was not confident this was true, but she told the colleague, likely Dan is just in the middle of a lesson, and that's why he's not picking up his phone. He's probably just fine. The colleague sort of agreed and decided they would sort of wait and see if maybe Dan got back in touch with them. But as soon as Nancy hung up the phone, she threw her laptop aside and ran downstairs and turned on the TV. And as she was flipping through channels looking for the news to find out more about the shooting, she also grabbed her phone and called Dan. But it rang and went to voicemail. So she hung up, she tried it again, but again he didn't answer. And so she texted him, but he didn't text back. At this point, the news was now on the TV. And as Nancy took stock of what she was seeing on the screen, she was horrified. Because it was all these images, from helicopters and from reporters showing Dan's school with all these police and all these news crews outside. I mean, clearly something had happened at the school. And she had just spoken to the colleague who said there was maybe the shooting. And so she raised the volume to see if they would maybe say, was it a shooting? Did somebody get shot? Who got shot? Who did the shooting? What happened? But nobody was saying anything that clarified it, just that something had happened at the school. And so at this point, Nancy couldn't wait any longer. She grabbed her keys, rushed out to her car, and she sped towards Dan's school. Less than 20 minutes later, Nancy drove through that same beautiful neighborhood that she had been in that morning in Portland. But this time, instead of admiring the scenery, she was laser focused on trying to find out if Dan was okay. She was calling and texting him, and she was cycling through the radio to hear any news broadcast about what had actually happened here, to make sure Dan was not involved in it in any way. But at this point, all she had learned from the news was that there really had been a shooting at the Oregon Culinary Institute.
For the sake of the story, let's call this person Rose. Now, Rose and her boyfriend had been together for 2 years, right? So they're out of like the honeymoon phase. Oh my God, I can't talk. So they pretty much like fight a lot, right? And so this all started over one really big fight that they had. It was to the point where they didn't speak for like a month, and within that month, he was so depressed, the boyfriend, that he took a trip with his family just to like get his head together. They visited other family, and this is where the story starts. So let's give the boyfriend a name. Let's call him Leon. So Leon is heartbroken. He's depressed. He just had a huge fight with Rose, right? They broke up. So his mom and his sister were supposed to take this small little road trip, so he decided to tag along. His mom was visiting an old friend. So they go. The road trip was pretty fun. He goes, he meets the old friend. So the friend was happy to see Leon because the last time she saw Leon was in diapers. So it was great conversations. They ended up talking about like the breakup and stuff like that. And so Leon was venting to her a little bit. And so the lady tells Leon, hey, I can help you fix your relationship. Leon is like, I'm all ears. How do I fix it? She said, don't worry. I will help you, but you have to do everything I say exactly as I say it. Leon is like, okay, great. But she doesn't say anything else. Like for the rest of the trip, she doesn't say anything about it up until that Leon is about to leave. So as Leon is about to leave out the door, she comes in with this little container. And in the container, there's like 3 little puff pastries. And Leon was like, oh my gosh, thank you, Auntie. Thank you for this. And, I'm so glad to meet you. I'm glad I got to know you. And so she goes, no, that's not for you. Leon is like, who is it for? Is it for Mom? She's like, no, it's for your girlfriend. And at first, Leon is like, huh? Okay. thank you, I will give it to her. And then she says to him, this is how you're gonna fix your relationship. So he's like, with puff pastries? She's like, yes. She says, give these to her and make sure she eats it warm. However, do not warm it in the microwave or the oven or nothing. Leave it in the sun for exactly 30 minutes so that it gets warm. Then give it to her. And as she's eating it, make sure you remind her how much you love her. Do exactly as I say and your relationship will be just fine. Andrew, at that point, his mom and his sister was already in the car, so this is just a conversation between them. So he's like, okay, thanks, Auntie. They say their goodbyes, and Auntie reminded him, if you're gonna do this, do exactly as I say. If you're not gonna do it exactly how I tell you, don't do it at all. Leon is like, I heard you, Auntie, I heard you. So boom, they head back home. And really, Leon is not really thinking about doing it for real. But on his way home, he looks at Rose's story and Rose is outside. For some reason, that pisses him off. And he's like, you know what? I am gonna do it. So he gets home. He puts the damn bowl in the sun for 30 minutes like he was told. It got warm and he immediately went to her. Said, hey, I'm back from my trip. I missed you so much. I'm sorry. I don't care that we're fighting. Like, I brought you this. And she's like, aw, thank you so much, Leon. You're the best ever in the world. Duh. She takes the pastries. You know, she's just a girl. It's pastries. She starts eating it. And Leon is like, you know, I love you, right? Like, I don't want to lose you. I want our relationship to work as she's eating it. Just like he was told. Cool. That happened. She eats it. And Leon is like looking at her like, what's gonna happen? What's gonna happen? What's gonna happen? But nothing happens. Nothing happens. She eats it. They hang out. They go to sleep. Everything's fine. So next morning, they wake up to their door being banged on. Like somebody's banging on the door. So they both get up like, who is this? Like, who's banging on the door like that? Only to realize that it's Rose's mom. So they open the door. Rose's mom walks inside, goes straight to Leon, and says to Leon, you gotta pack your shit and get out. Leon is looking really confused like, what? So is Rose. Rose is like, what? Get out. Wait, Mom, what happened? Rose's mom looks at her like, do you know this man tried to do voodoo on you? Rose is like, what? Leon, voodoo? Mom, come on, like, what? And then she looks at Leon, and Leon looked guilty. Guilty. So her face drops. Her face is like, excuse me? Like, why do you look like you're guilty? So immediately, Rose's mom puts her purse down, takes out her anointing oil, started to anoint Rose, and starts anointing the apartment while yelling at him to get out. Rose is standing there looking very confused. She turned around and Leon starts to pack his stuff so he can leave. And his face is still looking as guilty as ever. So Rose starts tearing up and she's looking at Leon like, what is she talking about? And why do you look guilty? And as she's saying that, Rose's mom turned to Leon and asked him, like, what is it that you did? Like, what did you do and why did you do it? Leon immediately starts crying. And he starts apologizing. He's like, Rose, I'm sorry. Like, I didn't think it was something bad. Like, I didn't think it would be, I thought it was going to be harmless. So Rose is literally standing there in such shock looking at this man. She asks him, what's going to happen to me? What was supposed to happen? What was the plan? And he goes, it was supposed to fix our relationship. But Rose is like, but what was going to happen to me though? Like right now, what's going to happen to me right now that I know? And he's just looking at her all stupid like, I don't know. That answer just pissed her off. So she just looked at him and was like, get out. Like, get out. My mom is right. You need to get out. Because at this point, she's freaking out. She don't know what's going to happen to her. She don't even know what he did. And he seems to have done something but don't know what he did, like what? And then she thought about it. She turned to her mom like, Mom, how did you know? Mom is like, I had a dream about it last night and I knew I had to be here first thing in the morning. God told me to come here and make sure you were okay. Now don't worry, you're gonna be fine, you're gonna be okay. Nothing's gonna happen to you, but you need to let that man go. Now, Rose did turn out fine, thank God, like nothing bad happened to her. Besides having like a lot of nightmares, nothing else like bad really happened to her. So Leon definitely did try to come back to talk to Rose, but at that point, Rose knew that she couldn't get back with him, and quite frankly, like she didn't really want to hear anything from him. So she kind of like completely went no contact because she grew up in like a religious home. So after a situation where her significant other tried to literally do magic on her, like she wasn't having it. But sometime later, she ended up seeing her ex's sister now her and her ex's sister were always close. Like, obviously, she met her through, you know, her ex, but they always had that bond. And the ex's sister wasn't one of the girls, like, that just, you know, enabled their brother. Like, she was a girl's girl. And so she ended up telling Rose the tea. Come to find out, that friend that gave Leon the pastries for Rose, come to find out, she wanted her daughter to marry Leon. So those pastries were never even supposed to fix the relationship. It was supposed to break the relationship, which is exactly what it did. So that Leon can be single, and she tried to set up her daughter with Leon, because Leon's parents did pretty good for themselves. And like I said, it was an old friend of his mom, and his mom wanted her daughter to marry into Leon's family. So yeah, that's the story, y'all. Rose is still standing on business. She says she's not going back to that man. She was really excited to tell me this story for y'all. Don't forget, I'm having a Valentine's Day sale on the ebook. When you're buying it, type in the code LOVE and you'll get 20% off, okay? Also, my song drops on Valentine's Day too, okay? Okay, I love you, bye. Oh, and don't forget to tell me what you was eating in the comments. We can't forget about that. Okay, I love you, bye.
It's time for another spooky story. I am Autumn in Appalachia. Send me your spooky stories. Make sure to add me on Facebook and subscribe on YouTube, same handle. Without further ado. This follower will be remaining anonymous. Let's call her Jennifer for the video. One night, Jennifer is getting ready for bed, and she gets up out of her bed. She walks to a dresser that's right beside her closed bedroom door to turn the light off and grab her phone charger. When she gets close to that bedroom door, she hears her little sister, Kaylee, on the other side of the door calling out her name. This wasn't unusual because Kaylee often begged Jennifer to sleep in her room, and Jennifer kind of got annoyed hearing her sister on the other side of the door because this would have made the third night in a row that Kaylee asked to sleep in Jen's room. Jennifer really just wanted one night alone in her own room, and so she kind of, with a tone, responds, "What, Kaylee?" And there's no response. At this point, she's a little more annoyed, and she's like, "Hello?" Again, no response from Kaylee. So Jennifer swings the door open, and Kaylee's not standing there. Now, everybody is supposed to be asleep in the house. Jennifer said that Kaylee's room is downstairs and that they lived in a very old house. There is no way Kaylee could have made a dash for it that quick down the stairs without Jennifer hearing the floorboards creaking. So she thinks, okay, maybe Kaylee's still upstairs and she's like hiding from me. So she goes and checks around the whole upstairs. Her other siblings are dead asleep in their rooms. The lights are off. Nobody's in the bathroom. Nobody's in the hallway. Kaylee's definitely not up there. At this point, Jennifer's like, all right, that's weird. Like, I know I heard her voice. She was right outside the door. And so she gets creeped out enough that she decides she's going to sleep downstairs in the living room rather than stay in her bedroom. So Jennifer gets downstairs to the living room. She goes to put her things on the couch when she looks over and sees that Kaylee is asleep in the living room. And it looked like she had been asleep for a good while. So this just further intensified the creep factor. Jennifer tries her best to just put it out of her head, forget about it. She lays down on the couch to start drifting off to sleep. Now, she said that her mom's bedroom is attached to the living room, and her mom always goes to sleep with the door open. After about 10 minutes of laying there, Jennifer hears her mom, who's in her bedroom, say, "Kaylee, what do you want? Kaylee." Jennifer's stomach sank when she heard her mom say this because Kaylee's asleep right next to her. So she screams at her mom and is like, "Kaylee's in here asleep." Jennifer's mom darts out of her room. All the color is drained from her face. They are both terrified. They are screaming. And after they are able to calm down enough, her mom explained what she saw. So her mom had been laying in her bed. All the lights are off. She's playing on her phone. She goes to plug her phone up on the charger, and when she does, she turns over and faces the opposite way. She always slept with a box fan, so she's like facing this box fan. That's when she sees Kaylee standing behind this box fan in the darkness, staring at her. And that's why she said, "Kaylee, what do you want?" There's no response, so she again says, "Kaylee." At that moment is when Jennifer had said, "Kaylee's in here with me asleep." As Jennifer was saying, "Kaylee's in here with me asleep," Kaylee, who is standing behind the box fan, quote unquote, moves around that box fan and starts walking toward mom's bed. She's like standing less than a foot away from her mom's bed when her mom realizes that whatever is in front of her, it's not her daughter. She is petrified. So because it is really dark, she turns back around just long enough to grab her phone for some light so she can like illuminate Kaylee's face. When she grabs the phone and turns back around, Kaylee, or whatever it was, is gone. The mom swears that whatever she saw, both of them swear that the voice that they heard was Kaylee's voice. And it looked like Kaylee standing in the mom's bedroom. They don't know how to explain it. It still creeps them out. They've never had anything like that happen. Y'all excuse me while I ascend into the 9th realm. That shit is scary. And I can personally relate. Y'all OGs who have been here for a while have heard me share this story time. My very first scary story about how one of my exes saw me sitting, who by the way was a very big skeptic, saw me sitting on the bed, but it wasn't me. Whatever it was, same hairdo, same outfit that I was wearing that day, and my ex wasn't the only one that saw it. Both of my dogs saw it too. They were like physically reacting to seeing me, quote unquote, sit on the bed, like wagging their tails, walking up to like the edge of the bed, you know, to be pet. And yep. So Kaylee girl, I know how it feels to have a mimic or a doppelganger of yourself out there somewhere. Y'all let me know what you think in the comments and stay tuned for some more spooky stories.
Let's talk about some conspiracy theories. Okay, so I just went to Reddit and typed in conspiracy theories in the search bar, and I came across this thread. What's the craziest conspiracy theory you actually believe? No judgment here. We're living in a time where almost nothing feels too strange anymore. Share the theory you believe and explain why it makes sense to you. And this was posted 3 months ago, so very recent. Okay, so let's scroll through and see what conspiracy theories people mention and what they have to say about it. There's more to Antarctica than they're telling us. Oh my gosh, I believe in this wholeheartedly. I went down a deep rabbit hole on Antarctica, and I guess like one of the conspiracy theories I heard about Antarctica is that Antarctica is actually like a portal to a place that is so beautiful and so much better than this, and only the elite have access to that, and they're not telling us about it. Either way, whatever is going on down there, it is so weird because the world can't agree on anything. There's wars every day, but everybody, all of the leaders can agree on not fucking with Antarctica? No, something's going on down there. The phone listens. Happened multiple times where I have had a conversation, did not Google or ask Siri, etc., just a face-to-face convo, and the topic of conversation shows up as an ad. Dude, that has been happening to me for years. Like, I could be talking about pickled radishes, and I've never looked up pickled radishes on my phone, and I'll open my phone and I'll see a video for pickled radishes. Like, that is so freaking weird and so true. We're being energetically farmed by an interdimensional reptilian race that feeds off low frequencies that we emit when we have negative emotions. They've strategically set the whole world up to make everyone as miserable and stressed and unhealthy as possible, because when we feel bad and the frequency emanating from our electromagnetic field becomes low, they consume these low frequencies as their food in a sense. It's the root of all issues on our planet. I totally believe this. Like alcohol, alcohol is horrible for you. As somebody who had a horrible alcohol problem for the majority of their life, I stopped drinking in 2023. But like, alcohol is legal and it makes you depressed. It makes you do stupid things. At least I did stupid things while drinking. Yeah, and it just keeps you at a low vibration. But that's legal. But this isn't legal everywhere, and this is actually proven like to help people and make people feel better. They don't want us feeling better. And if this became legal everywhere, that would put so many other businesses like out of business or just making less money. That's a whole other conspiracy. But anyway, I definitely think that they are trying to keep us low they show us bad things everywhere that makes us scared. Like, what is that called? Like fear mongering or whatever. I also heard of another conspiracy the other day about how the government hires people to drive on roads and create more traffic. So like rush hour traffic, like the government hires people to drive in that traffic to make more traffic, and obviously traffic pisses you off, and then you get home, you're in a bad mood, maybe you're mean to your partner or your kids because you're so stressed out, and also being that stressed out, that makes you not want to do like good things for yourself. You're just gonna be pissed, come home, have a beer, smoke a little or something like that, and then not get anything done, and that's not progressive and good for you. Anyway, I could talk about this one for freaking ever. They are 100% trying to keep us down, and we cannot let the bastards grind us down. Okay, moving on. That little people live in the ground. Someone says, go on. I don't know why that's so funny to me. I've never heard that before. Let's see if anybody gives us some context. Okay, there's really no context in what that person said, but I have like heard of the conspiracy of people living like in the center of the earth. Like there was like those 2 kids a long time ago that people found, and their skin was green, and I think their eyes may have been black, and they said they lived like underground, like in the center of the earth or something like that. They were from somewhere completely different. I mean, I believe that. I've never been to the center of the earth, so I don't know what's in there. Oh, here's a good one. That Britney Spears is... Someone commented, I remember videos of her on Insta where it looked like someone else using an AI face filter. It was so weird. And then someone else said, yeah, and I've been seeing more, and at first I was like, how ridiculous, and now I'm like, but what if? I don't understand how her video quality is so distorted and grainy when I'm sure she could afford a phone with a higher def camera. Her censorship has ended and she's never really photographed out and about. With all the AI and fake stuff, reality feels so distorted to me now. That's actually a really good point. I feel like we don't really see her photographed like out and about. That's really sad if that's true, because I'm a 90s kid, 93, so I grew up on Britney Spears, and that is just so terrible what happened to her. When you dream about yourself in various situations, you are actually viewing yourself through the lens of another you in another dimension, living in infinite parallel existences created at random. I feel like I kind of believe this one too. Like, we did a video the other day on astral projection and like talked about like vivid dreams, that they feel so real. I don't know. I feel like some dreams can just be random, like whatever you're thinking about in your subconscious, but some dreams feel so real that I do question if that is myself, like in another dimension. If there's another me in another dimension, I hope she's doing a lot better than I am, honestly. Okay, we're gonna end on this one. The wealthiest people on earth, bankers, politicians, and billionaires, are part of some exclusive club where they partake in secret rituals, gloat about their wealth, and discuss strategies about how to control the world. Well, after everything that's come out recently, we all now know that that is true. But even before this came out, girl, I've been saying that. We are being controlled. Don't let the bastards grind you down.
You can't make this stuff up. Might have known the story of real-life boogeyman.
Let's read a short story about the Appalachian Mountains. This story was submitted by Paige. It is a creative short story called The Thing in the Woods. My name is Chelsea. I'm a 26-year-old woman, and I've lived in the Appalachian Mountains my entire life. I'm sure you've heard all the stories and warnings. Don't go into the woods at night. If you hear something that sounds off, pretend you didn't. Stuff like that. I've always been a skeptic. I've heard people talk about their encounters with flesh pedestrians, wendigos, whatever you want to call them. I'd heard all of it, but I never really believed in any of it. At least, not until I was 20. I live in a very small rural town in the middle of nowhere. No big cities nearby. Just a couple neighborhoods, one grocery store, and a lot of forest. Growing up, I never had any strange experiences. My parents would sometimes get tense at night, but I was a kid. I didn't really think too much of it. For my 20th birthday, a few friends and I decided to go camping in a much more remote part of the mountains. My parents tried to talk me out of it. They said we should go somewhere more fun, but I brushed it off. We packed some basic supplies and drove about an hour and a half to the campsite. The moment we arrived, it felt like the entire forest went silent, like someone had muted the world. We set up our tents, ate dinner, and started drinking. I don't remember much after that. At some point, I wandered off to use the bathroom. I didn't ask anyone to come with me. I was drunk and didn't think it mattered. On the way down the trail, I heard screaming. I honestly thought it was one of my friends messing with me, so I ignored it and kept walking. But on the way back, I felt it. That deep, sinking feeling in your stomach. The kind you get when you know someone is watching you. Every small sound in the bushes made me jump. Then I heard the screaming again. It called my name, in my voice. I stopped and looked around. That's when I saw it. A tall, pale figure stood partially hidden between the trees ahead of me. It was too thin, too still. I could see its mouth moving, but no sound was coming from it. Behind me, I kept hearing my name, over and over. I couldn't move. I couldn't even look away from it. The bushes behind me started to rustle. Then the thing in front of me took a step forward. It wasn't a normal step, but rather it covered too much distance. Then another. That's when my body finally let me run. I don't think I've ever run like that in my life. I didn't look back. I didn't know if it was right behind me or watching from the trees. I just knew I had to get back. When I reached the campsite, I was crying, shaking, and barely able to talk. We packed up and left that night. For weeks afterward, I kept hearing my name being whispered in my own voice. Sometimes I'd hear a soft tapping on my bedroom window. About a month later, I was in my room watching a movie. My window was open a crack. I heard it again, much closer. I turned toward the window. It was standing right outside. Its breath fogged the glass. I couldn't move. I just watched as it slowly raised one long finger and tapped on the window. Once, twice, 3 times. It felt like it lasted forever. Then it turned and walked away. I haven't seen it since, but I swear it still follows me. Not close enough for me to see, just far enough away that I can feel it. I really think this writing is awesome, and it's also very reminiscent of the true stories that I've read about the Appalachian Mountains. I think Paige did a really good job of putting all of the spooky things into one story, which is awesome. As someone who lives near the Appalachian Mountains, I am thoroughly spooked, so thanks again for sending this one in. If you guys have any stories you'd like me to read, and this includes any short, creative, scary writing stories that you have, please email them to me and I will get to them if I can, and I will see you in the next one.
Are horror movies opening up gates that they can't close? Recently, I stumbled upon this article about strange things that had happened on the sets of some of our favorite horror movies, and I want to talk about them. On the set of The Possession that was released in 2012, there were several strange things, like lights exploding for apparently no reason, and weird breezes kind of coming through the set. But the scariest thing is when a storage facility caught fire and burned to the ground. When it was investigated, they could not figure out where the fire had started. It wasn't arson and it wasn't electrical, so it was just determined as undetermined by investigators. Now, the Dybbuk box that was used in the film was burnt during this fire, and the cast members refused to allow them to replace it because they thought it was cursed. The Exorcism of Emily Rose is probably top 3 of my favorite horror movies. I absolutely love this movie, but Jennifer Carpenter said that while she was staying in her hotel room during filming, the radio in her room would turn off and on by itself. Each time it would come on, she would hear the song Alive by Pearl Jam playing, but she wasn't the only one who experienced this. Other cast members also said that this was happening to them, and they also heard the song Alive by Pearl Jam. It got so bad that they eventually had to have the radios removed from their rooms because it was just too creepy. On the set of The Conjuring, there were several things that were really scary, like the Perron family actually came to visit the set, and a very mysterious wind started up and was swirling around them. But the scary part was that other cast members noticed that none of the trees around them were moving. It appeared as if this wind was attacking only them. There was also a mysterious fire that broke out on this set, but the worst part that I read was James Wan, who was the director of this film, said that he was working late one night and his dog kept growling at something that he couldn't see. He did get up to go investigate, and truly there was nothing there that the dog would be growling at. He said that it appears as if his dog was staring at some kind of unseen entity. Vera Farmiga, I hope I said her last name right, but she played the role of a paranormal investigator, and she refused to read the script at night because she said it was just too scary. It would scare her really bad. But on top of that, one night she opened up her laptop and it looked like 3 slashes had been scratched across her laptop. The Twilight Zone, the movie, which came out in 1983, had a really tragic accident. Vic Morrow, who was the father of actress Jennifer Jason Leigh, he passed away on the set of this movie. But what makes this really strange is that he seemed to predict it. He told his friends and family that he had a premonition that something bad was going to happen to him on the set of his next movie. He took this so seriously that he took out a $5 million life insurance policy on himself. There were also 2 child actors that had lost their lives in this accident as well, and this prompted an investigation, which was then discovered that they had illegally hired these children. Like, it was a really tragic story. But even more chilling, it was revealed that the movie concept artist mistakenly drew out a burned out helicopter in the middle of the river, which was also kind of a premonition of what was going to happen. Now, the Amityville Horror also had some strange things happen, but I'm going to focus mainly on the 2005 movie with Ryan Reynolds. Right before filming started for this movie, there was unfortunately a body that washed up on shore on the set of this film. But that wasn't the only creepy thing. Many of the crew members, like the cast, the actors, all of them, they started waking up at 3:15 every morning, like on the dot. What's chilling about that is when the murders supposedly took place. As you probably know, the Amityville movie was based on the Ed and Lorraine Warren story about how they investigated this house after a family was brutally murdered. So what are your thoughts on this? Are they opening up gates that they can't close, or is this all just a coincidence? Let me know your thoughts down in the comments and follow for more spooky things.
I don't know why paranormal things follow me around the way that they do, but they do. I think it's because I'm from the Appalachian Mountains and it's just ingrained into your body a little bit. You experience things in a more heightened sense. Well, after I moved to Florida, I made a new friend. He's a veteran and he could experience things the same way that I can, but he experienced a lot of really bad things in war, and I couldn't even deal with the things that he would see. So we were going to go to the Keys and we were going to go fishing. I had points to stay at this motel in Homestead, Florida for free. Y'all know if it's free, it's for me. I'm staying there if it's free. We get to this motel in Homestead, not a great part of town. Check in, everything's fine, take showers, blah, blah, blah. The bathroom door in this motel is the most creaky thing I've ever heard, like when it opens. This bathroom door opened once by itself. We looked over like, whatever, maybe it's a draft. Happened again. And then we started smelling rotten meat. Y'all know when you smell rotten meat, it means something that's not good. And if you don't believe me, scroll, I don't care. This happened to us. When we started smelling that rotten meat, this horrendous, like, primal fear just come over both of us. We looked at each other. We got out of that room. Didn't take anything with us. We went outside across the parking lot and sat at this little like iron table you would have like at your grandma's house that's been painted 50 times white. We sat up there. We left the front door to the motel room open. And we did not go back in that motel room until the sun come up. I don't remember the name of the motel. It's in Homestead, not a great part of town. Very, very old, rundown, short ceilings type place. But I don't know if that thing was there in the motel or if it followed one of us there. It could have been any of the above.
Have you ever heard talking or laughing or weird sounds while you're in the shower? Now, believe it or not, a lot of people have had paranormal experiences while in the shower. And I think it's because you have to understand that is when we are the most vulnerable, right? We're unclothed. We are not really focused on anything. And we sort of can't see anything around us. And I think when you have an encounter in the bathroom, it's usually something negative. Now, this is a story that comes out of Chicago. There was this young girl who lived with her roommate. And she said one day she's at the house, she's taking a shower. And said all of a sudden as she's washing her hair, she sees a hand come around the curtain and it's like moving. And she thinks this is her roommate who's just like messing around with her. So she starts slapping the hand and is like, stop it, get out of here, I'm trying to shower. And when she gets out of the shower and goes to see like what her roommate wanted or what she was doing, she realizes her roommate isn't even home. So she, is like, okay, that was really weird. Like maybe I don't know, was imagining it. About 2 weeks later, she once again is in the shower.
And as she's taking a shower, she can see the shape of a man standing behind the shower curtain. And, you know, she's terrified. Like, I don't know what to do. Like, what do I do in this situation? So she grabs the shower curtains and pulls them over, and there's no one there. Several other times, you know, she would be in the shower and, like, you know, she would hear someone talking, or she would get the feeling that someone was touching her back, and she would look around and there was no one there. So this kept happening, and she, you know, wondered, like, why is this happening to me? And, like, why doesn't my roommate ever experience this? Until one day she's going out of her house and she talks to the neighbor. And the neighbor says, you know, there used to be a young guy who lived here, and he dated a girl that looked just like you. And it's crazy. The young guy, he was in the shower, he slipped and fell, hit his head, and passed away.
Back in 1860s Louisiana, a young woman named Selah escapes from a witch hunter and ends up in the future. But before I get into it, it's Black Witch Month, where every day for the month of February, I seek to explore a different Black witch or supernatural. And today, I'm discussing Des from the movie The Unseen. Now, the premise of this movie is pretty simple. Back in 1860s Louisiana, a young woman named Selah escapes from a witch hunter and ends up in the future. And this is where we meet her counterpart, Des, who happens to be Selah's distant relative. Now, fast forward 160 years, we're in Kansas City, and we meet a young woman named Des. Des doesn't have too much going on, but what she does have is an insane love of music. And as an aside, one of the best things about this movie, just right off the bat, is the music behind it. I'm not sure who the producer for the sound was on this film, but they did an incredible job, because it had me shazamming at least 4 or 5 songs from this movie. But much like myself, our main character Des here has a love of music, and that's what she preferred to do. She lives her life in song, and sometimes it becomes a distraction. Now, Des doesn't have any lofty aspirations, but if she had the ability to do something, it would be related to music. Now, at one point in the future, Des is out on a walk, and she decides for some reason that she's going to take a detour, and it leads her through a park. She gets to this area and she finds a rock, which is pictured here, and this rock knocks her out. Like, it doesn't hit her or anything, but when she connects with this rock, there is some sensation that takes over her, and she ends up passing out. And when she wakes up, she's got a voice in her head, and the voice is not her own. But shockingly, Des is handling that quite well. She starts to have conversations with this voice in her head, and she finds out that this voice is that of her distant relative. Now again, Farah is from the 1850s, and through her traveling abilities, which sent her across time to find a new relative, she reconnects with Des here in an attempt to get back to a physical body, which Des willingly helps her do, although not without some training. But one of the coolest things about this film was the interaction between Selah and Des, and how her relationship with this new voice inside her head changes her life for the better. Des goes from having, I'm not going to say zero aspirations, but she was misaligned with the things that she wanted to do versus the things she was doing. And with Selah's introduction into her mind, things start to change pretty rapidly. And it's through Selah's presence with Des that we learn a lot about this universe. One of the things that I found especially cool about this movie was the fact that everyone surrounding Des pretty much knew about the magic taking place in the world around her, except Des. But with her great aunt Selah coming in, Des is introduced to a completely new world. And the support she gets along the way is interesting, because people are so willing to accommodate, to include a magical arms dealer who does not dabble in his craft, and her best friend who can hear Selah before Des even acknowledges her existence to him. And this is such a fun movie because, again, through her connection with her great aunt Selah, Des starts to discover things about herself that she didn't even know. And the first, and probably the most impressive, is that much like Selah, Des has magical abilities, and they're not just normal magical abilities either, because Des is a traveler. Now, like I mentioned, there are other supernaturals in this universe. In fact, part of the reason that Selah is in the present day with Des is because she was escaping a witch hunter, a white one, hell-bent on acquiring witches and their abilities. But with Des's help, Selah might hope to defeat this individual. And so the training montage begins. Des learns that she can travel, at first unintentionally, but with more focus, more practice, and more rounds of trial and error, Des starts to get really good at what she does, eventually being able to travel in and out at will. And with the help of her friends, she starts to learn more about the magical universe surrounding them. For instance, she's able to go into the ancestral realm, where she meets people from different times that are a part of her family, or at least close to her family. And this heightened awareness allows Des to start asking questions of herself that she never thought to ask before. What is she doing with her life? Where does she go now? Are you in alignment? And now that you have the ability to go anywhere you want to, What's stopping you? Now, as Des gets more comfortable in her power, she becomes more self-assured, and she goes through her own fair shares of trials and tribulations, but she ends up on top. But before I close it out, one of my favorite things about this movie, besides the music, is the dialogue. Des is funny, she doesn't take herself too seriously, and her internal dialogue with her Aunt Sela is incredible. It's humorous, it's lighthearted, it creates awareness, and I found myself really attached to this character, possibly because I also think she has a bit of a dry sense of humor, and so that was really endearing to me. But I would definitely recommend you watch The Unseen. You can catch it on Tubi, which means it is free, and if you've seen this movie before, drop your thoughts in the comments, and I'll see you guys in my next video.
My name is Nestor, and I'm from California. This story happened a few years ago at my job while I was working the night shift at a warehouse in Salinas, California. I was loading an order that was going to Seattle. It was already late, close to the end of our shift, around 4:30 a.m. They sent someone to help me with the order. We'll call him Don Chetos. He wasn't the fastest helper, but at that time of night, I'll take any help I can get. At one point, I went to look for some product in a certain area of the warehouse, and there was no one around. Suddenly, I noticed someone from the production area walking behind the racks. That immediately felt strange, because nobody from production works that late. They usually get out around 2 in the morning. I took a closer look at her, and that's when I realized she didn't have a face. All I could see was her green helmet and white smock, but where her face should have been, it was completely dark, just a black shadow. I instantly got chills. I went back to Don Chetos and told him, let's hurry up and finish this order. He told me he was missing a couple of boxes and was going to look for them in the same area where I had seen the woman. I immediately told him I couldn't find them and that we should just turn in the order anyway. Honestly, I didn't want him to go over there. I was scared that if he saw her, he might have a heart attack or something. Later on, I found out that a woman had actually died in that warehouse years ago. I truly believe what I saw that night was her spirit wandering the area. To this day, I haven't seen her again, which is honestly a relief. I like to think she's resting in peace now.
Weird spooky dating stories. This happened a few years ago. My mom had an ex-boyfriend who unalived in a motorcycle accident, and it happened to be the 20-year anniversary of his death. That night, I ran into a store to get a few things while my mom stayed in the car and waited for me. My mom used to work at that store, and I grew up going there, so it's safe to say we knew almost everyone who worked there. Because of that, it didn't surprise me when I came out and saw a guy sitting in the passenger seat next to my mom. I just assumed it was one of the guys who worked there. I walked up to the car and bent down to look through the window to see who my mom was talking to, but no one was there. Within less than a minute it took me to walk to the car. The seat was empty. No one was inside except my mom. I got in, sat down, and suddenly felt ice-cold air go straight through me. I turned to my mom and asked her 2 questions. First, were you talking to one of the guys from the store just a minute ago? She gave me a weird look and said no. Then I asked, did you have the AC on in the car? Her response was also no. I left it at that and didn't say anything else about what I saw until a couple months later. When I finally told her, she went and pulled out her old high school yearbook and opened it. I pointed at a picture and said, "That's who I saw sitting next to you." She looked at the picture and said, "Yep, that's him." I told her he looked kind of grumpy. She explained that he always did. It was just the way he was. Without ever meeting this guy, never having seen his picture before, and not even knowing his real name, only a nickname, I was able to point out her deceased ex-boyfriend in her yearbook. I have no doubt in my mind that it was him sitting next to her that night. I think it's really cool that it was like the 20th anniversary of his unaliving, and he came and sat with her. Like, they still have that kind of connection even after all these years. Let me know in the comments what you guys think, or if any of you have ever had an experience like this, send it my way.
Anyone else notice that time has been speeding up? Like just the other day, I didn't even realize that it was Christmas in a couple days, because to me, it still feels like it's October. And over the past, I would say 6 to 7 years, time has been moving really, really fast. And I know people say as you get older that you experience time differently, but this just doesn't seem right. Like even older people are saying like time seems like it's moving faster than it did before. So the question is, what is going on? Like what is happening that we are experiencing time differently? Now, there's a story I heard about something called a time slip. It's where you can't account for periods of time or time moves differently. There was this man named Jacob. Jacob said that him and his friends, they went camping this one weekend in the Pacific Northwest. And he said they had set up their campsite and they had made this very large fire. And him and two other friends, they decided to go into town to get some supplies. So they leave their other friends around the campsite. So they get in the vehicle and they drive into town and they stop off at this general store. And they get some supplies and they get back in the truck. But when they get back to the campsite, they're shocked to see that this very huge fire that they built is just now coals. It is burnt down to the ground. And they said, you know, we couldn't have been gone that long. Like, how did the fire burn out so fast? Well, the other weird thing is that all of their friends were gone from the campsite. So they get out of the car and they start looking for their friends, yelling their names. And then finally they hear them and they find them. And their friends are like, oh my goodness, like we were wondering what happened to you because like you guys have been gone all night long. And they said, no, you know, we've only been gone for 45 minutes. And for some reason, that 45-minute trip to the grocery store was like several hours. And they could not figure out what had happened in that time from them going to the grocery store and coming back to the campsite.
It's such a difficult, sad thing for me to try and process that the person who played a part into bringing you into this world can also be the person to take you out. Lucy Harrison was only 23 years old. She was full of life and unapologetically passionate about the things that she believed in. She worked in fashion and she was living in a place called Warrington in England. And those who knew her described her as someone who, quote, cared deeply about the world around her. And her mother, Jane, said Lucy had, quote, a huge sense of right and wrong and loved to have debates about things that meant a lot to her, end quote. Lucy was the kind of girl who was very passionate about the things that she believed in, and she was the kind of person who was not scared to ask the difficult questions. And on January 10th of 2025, asking one of those questions cost her her life. Lucy traveled to Prosper, Texas, a suburb just outside of Dallas, with her boyfriend Sam during the holidays in 2024 going into 2025. They were visiting Lucy's father, Chris Harrison, who had moved to the United States when Lucy was only a child. It was supposed to be a happy reunion, a chance for Lucy to spend some time with her father, her stepmother Heather, and her two younger half-sisters. But on the morning of January 10th, 2025, the day that Lucy and Sam were supposed to fly back to England, things went terribly wrong. The tension started earlier that morning. Lucy and her father got into what Sam described to be, quote, quite a big argument about President Donald Trump. At the time, the president was just days away from starting his second term. During that argument, Lucy challenged her father on questions, specifically questions regarding SA. Sam later testified that Lucy asked her father, quote, how would you feel if I was the girl in that situation and I had been SA'd? And according to Sam, Chris Harrison's response to that question was cold. He said something along the lines of, quote, it would not upset me that much, bringing up the fact that he had two other daughters that lived with him in Texas. Lucy was visibly upset and she ran away from the conversation, running up the stairs. About 30 minutes later, before Lucy and Sam were scheduled to leave for the airport, everything changed. Chris Harrison walked into the kitchen where Lucy was standing, took her by the hand, and led her into his bedroom. Sam later described the way that Chris took her hand as, quote, mysterious. What happened next took only 15 seconds. This is a quote from Sam, quote, about 15 seconds later, I heard a loud bang, and then I heard Mr. Harrison screaming for his wife, Heather. Sam ran into the bedroom, quote, I remember running into the room and Lucy was lying on the floor near the entrance to the bathroom and Chris was just screaming, just sort of nonsense. She had been in the chest. She was gone. Lucy Harrison would remain forever 23 years old. When the time came for Chris Harrison, her father, to tell his version of events, he admitted that he had past problems with beverages, if you're picking up what I'm putting down, and he confessed that that day he had been having a lot of those certain beverages, saying that that made him forgetful. He submitted a written statement to the court, and his version of events was this. He claimed that him and Lucy had been watching a news segment on TV. He told Lucy that he owned a, or quote, a sense of security for his family, and then he asked her if she wanted to see it. They went into his bedroom where he kept it inside of a bedside cabinet. In Texas, he did not need a license to own the weapon for home defense. Quote, as I lifted to show her, I suddenly heard a loud bang. I did not understand what had happened. Lucy immediately fell. He told police at the scene, quote, we got it out to have a look, and just as I picked it up, it just went off.
Chris claimed that he could not recall whether or not his finger was on the trigger. He also apparently claimed that Lucy had asked him to see the though everyone who knew Lucy knew that she hated had previously expressed that they were a danger to the family. In other words, Chris's story was that he just didn't know how or why it happened because he just couldn't really remember. On February 12th of 2026, the coroner gave a statement stating that Chris's actions that day, resulting in Lucy losing her life, were intentional. Quote, to shoot her through the chest while she was standing would have required him to have been pointing the gun at his daughter without checking for and pulling the trigger. I find these actions to be reckless. The coroner did mention that Chris Harrison maybe could not have been aware that the weapon was loaded, but she continued, quote, he knew full well he had shot his own daughter, pointing a chest height and pulling the trigger. He did not ensure that this information was passed to 911. With a bullet through her heart, her prognosis was poor in any event. His actions have killed his own daughter, and in the cold light of day, it is hoped that he now recognizes the risk he posed to her life in circumstances in which he had no experience of, had undertaken no training, and had never fired a gun. Family members wept in court as evidence was presented, and what I just told you took place in a courtroom in the UK. However, in the States, things were different because the grand jury declined to indict Chris Harrison, meaning no criminal charges would be filed against him. He walked free. Lucy's family and friends, her boyfriend, her mother, it goes without saying, but they were absolutely heartbroken. Her mom, Jane, has said Lucy had, quote, so much more of life to live, to love, and to give. Jane also spoke about raising Lucy as a single parent and doing everything she could all the time since she was born to keep her daughter safe. Quote, I brought Lucy up in a single parent family, and along each step of the way, I did what parents do to keep their children safe, watching her play with her friends when she was little, staying awake until she came home late at night, and feeling grateful every time her return flight landed safely after visiting her dad and family. I never imagined she would be in the US in a place where she should have been safe. Jane went on to say that her and Sam believe that authorities failed Lucy, saying that there is so much to be learned from Lucy's needless and entirely avoidable death. As far as her dad's statement, this is what he had to say, quote, I fully accept the consequences of my actions, and there isn't a day where I don't feel the weight of that loss, a weight I will carry for the rest of my life, and I know that nothing I say can ease the heartbreak this tragedy has caused. I cannot undo what happened, but I can honor Lucy by being the best father I could to her sisters and by carrying her memory forward in everything we do. I'm deeply sorry for the pain others feel from this tragedy. Lucy's spirit, her warmth, her humor, her kindness will live in all of us who loved her. From everything that I read about Lucy, it sounds like she was a person who was so incredibly loved and had so much love left to give. It breaks my heart that her life was cut so incredibly short in a place where she should have been safe. That is all from me today. Let me know your thoughts on this case, and yeah, hope you guys are having the best day. If not, go do something to make it the best day. Make somebody happy, and I will see you in my next video. Massive kiss on the forehead to every single one of you.